Hello and welcome to the Mastermind, Body, and Spirit Show. I'm your host, Matt Belair. Today's guest is a San Francisco-based writer, lecturer, and consciousness hacker. She is the author of Liminal Dreaming, Exploring Consciousness at the Edges of Sleep. She is the founder of the Oneironauticum, an international organization that explores the phenomenological experiences of dreams as a means of experimenting with mind. She also teaches the practice of liminal dreaming, surfing the edges of consciousness using hypnagogic and hypnopompic dream states. She has lectured and led workshops at festivals, conferences, and venues worldwide. As an active member of the consciousness hacking movement, she has presented at Consciousness Hacking San Francisco and New York, and the Transformational Technology Conference. She has trained in Yoga Nidra with Uma Dinsmore-Tuli of the Yoga Nidra Network and with Richard Miller of iRest Yoga Nidra. Welcome to the show, Jennifer Dumpert.
Thank you very much. Lovely to be here.
Thanks so much for coming on the show. That was one of the most challenging read-throughs. I got 80% of that word. I got 90%. I don't know. So hopefully, I hit most of it. But your work is super fascinating. I really love dream research and altered states and subconscious and that whole entire world, lucid dreaming. So really happy to have you on the show and talk about your work. So why don't we just begin with a little bit about your background and how you got into this type of work and what you're writing about and what you're lecturing about today?
Okay. I come at it from 2 points of view, which is often kind of how I roll with these things. My undergraduate work, which was in Toronto, and my master's work in New York and my PhD work here in the Bay was on myth and religion. And dreams, of course, are a very important aspect of myth and religion. Also, subjectively, I am a very avid dreamer. A lot of my earliest memories are dreams. And I'm interested in practices. I think that by undertaking practices without concern about belief or alignment with particular traditions, I think practices are deeply beneficial. So I've crafted a lot of my own practices using dream work. So I kind of come at it from two different sides, both objectively and subjectively. And I started crafting my earliest practices with dreams in the early 90s after a really watershed experience with the late 80s. And I've kind of been lecturing and writing about dreams since. My current work, my upcoming book, which comes out in May, is about specifically liminal dreaming. I'll talk about that a little bit more. But I've also done a lot of work with oniragens, which is any substance, scent, practice, food, herb root, whatever it is that promotes really vivid dreaming. I have a worldwide dream group, and I've talked a lot about creating practices. I'm really interested in psychogeography, which is the relationship that people have with space, so the meaning that is imbued in space and that you can seed yourself. So I've done a lot of oniric psychogeographical practices, speaking of difficult to pronounce things. And my current work really, as I say, centers on liminal dreaming. My upcoming book, Liminal Dreaming, Exploring Consciousness at the Edges of Consciousness, is about this. And liminal dreaming is hypnagogia and hypnopompia, which are the dream spaces between awake and sleep. So hypnagogia as you're falling asleep, and hypnopompia as you're waking up.
Oh, interesting. Well, yeah, I was going to get you to define those words because I've heard of hypnagogic before, and I think that I knew that it was before you fell asleep, but I've never heard of hypnopompic. And so, can you define some of those other words? Because I think that you use some words that people might not be familiar with. The one is the one that I pronounce in the bio, Oneironauticum.
Oneironauticum. So the Oneironauticum is a dream group that I established more than 10 years ago. And my initial idea, it was just a thing that I started kind of for my friends. And it was people getting together in the same space and all using the same oneirogen. These are often herbs, roots, flowers, but also scent and sound are great oneirogens. Practices are great oneirogens. And the idea was that we would get together and experiment. And often these are things from traditional cultures. Traditional cultures practice a lot of oneiromancy, which is divination through dreams. Oneiro is the Greek root word for dream. And nauticum is a place where things happen. So Oneironauticum is a place where the dream happens. And we started experimenting with a lot of the things that traditional cultures use. And I kept an online account and database of the oneirogens with which we were exploring. And this was kind of heady earlier days of the web. And people just found it, stumble upon, found it. And then this Mexican site called Pajama Surf found it. And it ended up turning into like a worldwide phenomenon. So when I would do an Oneironauticum, and I still do them, I haven't done one in a little while, but so like a couple of thousand people around the world would all use the same oneirogen. So for example, and a group of us would sleep in the same place, kind of holding down the fort. People around the world would get the same oneirogen. So for example, mugwort, very easy to find, very easy to obtain, kind of everywhere in the world. It's very traditional in Korean culture to, for example, pour hot mugwort on stones and breathe in the steam, or to even take a mugwort water hot bath before sleep to promote really vivid dreams. And you can also, just the scent of it is really intense. When you're sleeping in REM sleep, which is when the dreams that you already know about happen, in REM sleep, your body is paralyzed. So acetylcholine and other chemicals flood your body to paralyze you so you don't act out your dreams. But the parts of you that are not paralyzed, the senses that you still have, are sense of hearing and sense of smell. You can hear and smell just as well when you're sleeping as you can when you're awake, because doesn't matter, there's no reason to shut those senses off. So that means that scent makes a really good oneirogen. So for example, working with mugwort, we would make mugwort sachets or put it in like a room humidifier to make steam in the room, or you can just put it in the end of a sock, use just fresh mugwort, or also use a mugwort oil and sleep with it near you. And so people around the world on the same night would, get mugwort and all sleep with mugwort, and then send me the accounts of some of the dreams that they had, which I've been a database you can find on my website. urbandreamscape.com has a lot of those dream reports, although I'm a little remiss in keeping it totally updated. And therefore we would study the effects of different oneirogens. It's amazing how much different oneirogens produce the same kind of effects in everybody. But one of the things that I love most about the Oneironauticum is dreaming is one of the most common, freaking weird human culture things. Like everybody dreams and always has. Every human alive now and ever has dreamed. And so keeping like this kind of worldwide dream community where with intention setting and with these oneirogens, we all, dream together is a kind of an amazing experience. So that's in short what the Oneironauticum is. I'm happy to go into that more in depth now or later.
Yeah, that's amazing. Well, I know when I was creeping around on the internet years ago, that's probably what I stumbled across, because I remember the word being so unique, and I was like, "What is this?" And that's you told me like the Greek word for dreaming, and I was like, "Oh, interesting." It's like a dream institute, and I think there's a lot of different ways that we can go with this, and I'll leave it up to you, but do you want to talk about like a little bit about your book? And I'm also just curious about, some of the things that you're finding and practical tools, like why would you want to remember your dreams, or how do you work with your dreams? And I have a lot of questions, and some of the best oneirogens that you've come up with, because it would be a very fascinating place. I remember meeting some people that were very frequent lucid dreamers, and I was for a bit, but it takes me a lot of effort to kind of go in. I really need to be going for it, but then I'll lucid dream quite a bit. And it's a very interesting experience. So if you're diving into that realm on a daily basis, you're pulling back some interesting information.
Mm-hmm. So good. Let's bookmark for a second on Oneironauticum stuff, and I'll talk to you about liminal dreaming, and then we can go back to it because there's a lot of oneirogens that are actually really useful for lucid dreaming and also for liminal dreaming. So liminal dreaming, which is different from lucid dreaming. Lucid dreaming happens in REM, which happens in the middle of the night and toward the end, and liminal dreaming happens at the very edges. So when you're falling asleep, you go through hypnagogia. And that comes from hypnos, which is also, sleep, dream, sleep, and gagia, which is, leading toward. And liminal, by the way, comes from the Latin limen, which is the boundary. So like limit, for example. So liminal dreaming is the dreams that happen at the spaces between awake and asleep. There's actually a space between awake and asleep. So hypnagogia is when you're falling asleep, and hypnopompia, which is also like sleep, like hypnotize, and pompe, which is leading away. So like pomp and circumstance, for example. Hypnopompia is when you're waking up. They're extremely strange mind states and brainwave states. Again, I like to talk about things both kind of like objectively and subjectively. I'm a phenomenologist, as you read in my bio there, which means the study of what happens, the study of experience. And so objectively, hypnagogia and hypnopompia are super unusual. Most brainwave states, both waking and sleep. So for example, right now, we're probably in beta because we're having a conversation, we're paying attention to it. And so most, brain stuff tends to be electricity and chemicals, right? So brain states are measured by EEG, and that's reading the electricity. And so it measures in sine waves. That's how different brainwave states are determined. And beta is 1440 hertz per second. So 14 to 40 waves per second, right? So we're like paying a lot of attention. And it's one wave that determines beta, right? And then if you're a little bit more relaxed, you go into alpha, you start to slow down a little bit, and that's 8 to 13 hertz. And when you're in like the deepest deep sleep, which is the slowest your brain goes, that's 0.5 to 3 or 4. So most brainwave states have one sine wave. Hypnagogia, and like one of them has 2. Hypnagogia has 9. And it's also the briefest brainwave state that there is. So hypnagogia and hypnopompia, unless you train yourself, I mean, I can linger there now for hours, but unless you're training yourself, most people only spend 4 to 10 minutes, something along those lines, in hypnagogia as they're falling asleep. Same thing, hypnopompia, as you're waking up. I'll talk a little bit more about hypnopompia. It's a little bit different than hypnagogia. And so it's very chaotic. It's also got, before you're falling asleep, you're in alpha, and then after you fall asleep, you're in theta. Theta is the one that has two. And hypnagogia has some of the brain waves of alpha and some of the brain waves of theta. What this kind of points to, and what the experience of it is as well, is like a continuity of consciousness. It isn't that you're awake or asleep, on, off. There's actually this continuity of space between awake and asleep, where your brain waves are doing this kind of chaotic thing. So that's kind of the objective of what's happening. So it's extremely unusual mind state. I'm just going to talk about hypnagogia now because it's a little easier to talk about. Subjectively, what happens in hypnagogia, again, along this continuity of consciousness, you have all these different kinds of experiences. Hypnagogia and hypnopompia are very poorly studied, partly because they're neither fish nor fowl. You're not really awake and you're not really asleep. So in, for example, a hypnagogic dream, you're aware of the outside world. You know where you are. I'm lying on my bed. I can hear, the truck go by on the street. I can hear the clock chime and count and know what time it is. I'm also asleep and dreaming. And there are different depths of dreaming that you can have in hypnagogia. One of the few people to study hypnagogia is this guy called Andreas Mavromatis, and he wrote a book in the 1980s called Hypnagogia. And he talks about the phases of hypnagogia. There's also another great book written by our homie Jeff Warren from Toronto called Head Trip that also has a great definition of the stages of hypnagogia. And it sort of starts out as just like points of light, you know, and then moves into like shapes and things changing, and moves into like just little scenes. You see something, and then moves further into the deeper asleep you get into like dream space. And the dream spaces in hypnagogia are not narrative in the same way that REM dreams are. They don't tend to be, they can be little mini storylines. They don't tend to be full out storylines. And there doesn't tend to be as much a subject and an object. So it's just things, it's a very psychedelic, kaleidoscopic swirl of your own associations, thoughts, memories, that kind of thing. It's a really, really amazing experience. And you know that you're in hypnagogia when your arm or your leg jerks. So that's called the myoclonic jerk. And kind of what's happening is at the same time that your brain waves are being really chaotic, your body has a little bit of chaos. And so your body kind of jerks. So that's how you know you're there. All right, I just laid a lot on you. Where do you want to go with that?
Yeah. Oh my God. Oh my smokes. Well, like I'm aware of this stuff, and I was like getting bounced around. It's okay, brainwave states. And then what I'd like you to go a little bit deeper in is to talk about what was it that you said has 9? Is it 9 brainwaves?
Nine. There's nine waves, sine waves that like, you know, these brainwave states, EEG readings that characterize hypnagogia and hypnopompia.
Right. Yeah, that's interesting. So when you're defining liminal dreaming, what do you, and you said you could stay there for hours. I'm curious about how you stay there for hours. That sounds interesting. And why would a person want to do that?
Great. So lucid dreaming, as you mentioned, is actually pretty difficult. You can, if you're not a natural lucid dreamer, you can teach yourself how to do it. But you have to really work at it. Liminal dreaming, on the other hand, which is my phrase for hypnagogia and hypnopompia, is extremely easy. Everybody is a natural liminal dreamer. And when I tell people about this work I'm doing, they often say, oh, I know that. And now, I mean, one of the greatest things about it is now that you've heard of it, you will have the experience. I mean, it's pretty much guaranteed. I mean, everybody naturally goes through hypnagogia or hypnopompia, or both. And so most of us think of it as just something you pass through as you're falling asleep. And it's not until you're like, wait a minute, that's a destination, that you start to be like, oh, wait, I can actually stay here in this space. And like once you train yourself, so my book has a lot of exercises for discovering hypnagogia and hypnopompia and for staying there. A bunch of them are on liminaldreaming.com, which is another of my sites. And also Yoga Nidra is a great way to find your way into hypnagogia if you want sort of somebody else to narrate that experience. So that's kind of how you get there and how you learn to linger. I mean, I've been practicing this now. It's kind of been my primary practice for the last few years. I have a lot of tips and tricks for staying there, including I've taught myself to talk through hypnagogia. So if I'm at the beginning of the continuity of consciousness of hypnagogia, sort of more in the middle toward the end, I can actually talk. And what I do is I lie with a voice activated recorder. You can easily buy an app for your phone for a few bucks that's a voice activated recorder. Keep it next to you, and then as soon as you start talking, it activates the recorder. So I have hours of me mumbling through my hypnagogia and narrating the dreams. And actually, I've also recently realized that when I'm at the the awake end of the continuity of consciousness of hypnagogia, I can type because I can touch type. So the automatic writing, which was like an experience that the Dadaists used to do, where you would get into hypnagogia and write, I do with a computer. So I get myself kind of into hypnagogia and I just start writing out the dreams. They're pretty great. I could read you a couple of them. They're slightly different from the ones when I'm talking. So why would you want to do this? There's a lot of reasons. And again, this is a lot of what my book is. The structure of the book is that the first half is talking about what it is, hypnagogia, hypnopompia, a lot of the science, charts of brainwaves and stuff, a lot of the history, and a lot of exercises for finding it and staying. And then the second half is a series of practices built around liminal dreaming. So you might want to go into it just because it's fascinating. It's an amazing thing that your mind is doing. And I speak at a pretty wide spectrum of places, conferences that are much more about, dream work or consciousness, down the other to like festivals, psychedelic conferences, that kind of thing. And when I'm teaching at some, like, for example, at the Azora Festival in Europe last year, I tend to teach something called dream tripping. And it's basically using hypnagogia and hypnopompia in the same way that people have traditionally used psychedelics for consciousness exploration. This is a fascinating, free associative swirl through your own mind. And so you really can, have these amazing experiences of seeing what's in your mind, the kind of endogenous high is something your body naturally produces. There's also something called autosymbolic phenomena, which was developed by a guy named Herbert Silberer, who was a contemporary of Freud's. And what he believed was that in hypnagogia, you see your thoughts in the language of image, and you can understand a lot about your thought process. It's different from interpretation, right? Interpretation is associating to try to find hidden meanings, but autosymbolic phenomenon is actually your thoughts in a different language. So for example, trying to edit, one of his famous examples is trying to edit a paragraph and seeing and dreaming himself planing a piece of wood. So autosymbolic phenomena, it's great for kind of understanding your thought processes. It's great for creativity, really good. So both Salvador Dali and Thomas Edison, independently of each other, came up with the same practice to use hypnagogia for creativity. So what they would do is Edison, who invented like everything, two balls, a ball in each hand, in an easy chair, over, like holding the balls over two metal plates. Dali would sit in a chair with, he's very specific about it, a brass Spanish key. And he also held over over a metal plate. And then they would go into a hypnagogic state, each person. And then as soon as, and Dali kept a sketch pad next to him, and Edison kept a notebook for writing down ideas. And as soon as they would start to fall asleep, they would let go of either the balls in Edison's case or the key in Dali's, and those would fall into the plates and wake them up. And Dali would immediately start sketching, and Edison would write down whatever ideas he had for inventions. And so a lot of people have used this kind of practice. Charles Tart, the 1970s psychologist who came up with a lot of some of our earliest ideas, about, alternative culture, consciousness kind of things, would do the same thing, but just holding his arm up as he fell asleep. And then as soon as his arm fell, he would start to jot down ideas. So great for creativity. Again, I'm dropping a lot, so I'm just going to keep going, but let me know if you want me to pause. And so I'll pause on that one. Do you have any questions about that?
No, I think that's fantastic. And I know that Einstein used it as well. And people, I didn't know Salvador Dali. That's a new one for me, using different ways to basically fall asleep, but wake yourself up and then access that state of mind. Some people will, talk about like accessing the unconscious. But yeah, I'm with you as far as those references. I think where my mind is going is, do you practice this when you go to sleep as well? Because you're kind of going to dive all the way into sleep. Like, do you stall it before you go into sleep? And then the second thing I wanted to ask was, I know that there's tools on the website and in the book as well, but if you have like a one or two top ones and one or two top oneirogens that people could use to assist. Because sometimes I get emails with all kinds of stuff. It's like, do you use this for dreaming? And I was like, I experiment with stuff, but you are the expert with that. So if I'm gonna use an assistant, I would like your opinion on what I'm gonna use.
Absolutely. So to get into hypnagogia is easier because you can do it anytime. You can do it with a nap. You can do it when you're falling asleep. I actually do most of my hypnagogia work during the day, during naps, because I fall asleep pretty easily. Sleeping is my greatest skill. So I fall asleep quickly and easily. And also, if you're doing hypnagogia work as you're falling asleep, you'll remember that something cool happened, but you have a night of sleep kind of between you and the work. So often you don't exactly remember what happened. And it's very difficult to bring back hypnagogic dreams because they're so fast moving and crazy, but it's great with naps. And so there's a lot of different exercises. So here's one. If you're during the day when your energy kind of naturally dips, and because of chronotypes and circadian rhythms, which I can explain in a minute if you like, we often have an energy dip, all of us, in the afternoon or early evening. So I tend to lie down on the couch or on the bed, depending, or people who fall asleep really easily sometimes just lean back in armchairs like both Edison and Dali did. And to find hypnagogia, a really good and easy exercise is something I call the feedback loop. So what you do is lie back and with an exhale, really relax your body. So, and use that exhale to relax everything and exhale out your energy. And there'll be something there. So maybe you'll start to have the beginning of a little sleepy dream. Maybe you'll just start to see little points of light. Maybe it's your imagination, right? I mean, when it comes to liminal dreaming, I talk a lot about liminal mind. Imagination as a faculty of perception, which it is. So maybe it's something in your imagination, a little glimmer of something. And what you want to do is you want to take your own energy that's keeping you awake and exhale it into that and animate it. So you're waiting for whatever it is, and then it will sort of start to take on its own life in your perception. You'll begin to perceive it, and you sort of take that in, you perceive it, and then exhale, relax your body, exhale your energy into whatever it is, and create a feedback loop between you and the hypnagogic state, you and the liminal dream. It starts to kind of take on more of its own life. And you start to feel yourself falling into the hypnagogia. That's a really easy one. Another one, they're my two favorite basic exercises, is something that I call the vanishing point. And what you're trying to do is become aware of the moment that you fall asleep. I can do it sometimes. And actually, sometimes my body falls asleep before my mind does, which is a very weird experience. So what you're trying to do is basically just stay aware of the moment that you fall asleep. So keep your mind awake enough that you don't fall asleep. So if you're starting to fall asleep, just give yourself a little mental juice, but asleep enough that you don't wake up. It's a slightly difficult line to walk, and it's really actually hard to find the point when you fall asleep, but through trying this practice, a lot of times you'll actually be able to find the hypnagogic space. And one of the things about hypnagogia, people who take sleeping pills or people who have regular relationships with cannabis often have a hard time remembering REM dreams, like remembering middle of the night dreams. But those things actually kind of help you find hypnagogia. So it's like, again, like I say, once you've realized that it exists, it's easy to find it. Lengthening it out tends to be more the practice. But those are my two favorite practices for finding liminal dreaming.
Those are awesome. Yeah, I'm gonna definitely try that. And I like the idea. It's almost like giving me permission to nap during the day, which I like, because I'm a sleeper. I can sleep like through anything, anytime, anywhere, no problem. So getting into that, but like having a nap, as long as I can wake up, it's a really great, great experience, I think, to kind of be experimenting with that fringe of consciousness, is which kind of where I'd like to go. But before I do, I do want to ask about I think you're going to go in there with the I don't know. Some people take supplements. You call them oneirogens. Oneirogens. That sounds way better. And then the one I'm going to add on is when you wake up, do you do anything as far as that process? Maybe like set the alarm earlier and then see if you can whittle some dream time in there, or do you do anything for that?
So let's talk about oneirogens first. That comes from the oneiro, again, Greek for dream, and gen, which is to create, like generate. So oneirogens are things that create dreams. And there's a lot of great oneirogens, both for REM dreams and for liminal dreams, and also for lucid dreams. One of my favorites is something called Kalea Zakatichichi, and Calea Zakatichichi. If you just look up Kalea, you'll find it. And it's used by the Chantal people of northern Guatemala and southern Mexico for oneiromancy, divination through dreams. And the idea is that in dream realms, you go to the place of the gods or the divinities or the spirits. Culturally doesn't quite map to, I always try to be careful when I'm talking about this because it's culturally different understanding. But anyway, you're going to this place where they'll drop wisdom on you, but it's really hard to remember dreams. And so the Kalea helps you remember dreams. So what you do is you can buy it online. You be careful. You want to get a good organic form of Kalea. The place where I used to buy it doesn't sell it anymore, and so now I just kind of grow my own. But it's and not all these things are completely legal, which I'm discussing, by the way. And so what Kalea does is it gives you incredibly sensorially vivid dreams. So sense of touch, sense of smell, sense of taste. I've read books with red notes in the margins and pink highlighting with Kalea dreams before. Books are, difficult to read, and it's one of the ways that people know if they're dreaming. And if you want to try Kalea for liminal dreaming, what you do is you get it and you brew it into the worst, most god-awful bitter tea you will ever have in your life. About a heaping teaspoon in not boiling water, steeped for 10 minutes. It's really awful. And for liminal dreams, you want to drink it about an hour before you're going to try the liminal dream practice. For REM dreams, just drink it right before. And it's a very nice, weird, hazy, hypnagogic experience in of itself. It'll help you from liminal dream space. Also help you have really vivid dreams, and also people use it for lucid dreams. another great one is something called guayusa, which is used by a lot of sort of South American tribes, and it's sort of it's actually kind of caffeinated. It's kind of strong, but what the cultures do is you wake up in the morning and drink guayusa and dream share, right? Like the whole kind of tribe shares dreams. But if you drink guayusa like every morning for a space of time, you'll start to find you much more easily find liminal dream spaces. And in fact, I have a friend who was experimenting with drinking guayusa every morning, and his idea was to do it for a month. And he said he had to stop after 2 weeks because it started getting too disorienting. You know, like what was dream, what was not dream. He really opened up that space between dream and non-dream. I could go on, but those are a couple of my favorite oneirogens. There's a lot of really good ones. And oneirogens are so fun because there's it's a really good, easy way to find these spaces. You probably heard of galantamine, which its organic form is like red spider lily or white drop crocus. That is also for lucid dreaming, and it's great for community dreaming. That's one acting used for.
All right, so we're back again after some more technical difficulties. Hopefully the internet's going to be nice to us. But like I was saying, you're sharing some really high quality information on, you know, some things that can help us dream. You call them oneirogens, which is a really cool word. I was hoping you could spell a couple, because I was trying to Google them as you were saying them, and I wasn't sure I couldn't even begin writing it.
So I was just talking about Kalia Zakatachichi.
I found that one. Yeah.
Found that one.
Yeah.
And let's see, I was talking about mugwort, Mugwort. Yep. That's pretty straightforward. It
was the one before that where you said your friend was taking it, and he started
guayusa.
Yeah,
guayusa. Guayusa is it's either Gyu or GUY, USA, USA, GY. I should know that.
Oh, well, yeah, from there I can Google it from there, and I'll figure it out, and I'll put it in the notes for people so they can, you know, begin to use these things. Oh yeah. Guayusa tea. Okay.
And guayusa is also pretty easy to find.
Yeah, I think it's GUAYUSA.
That's it. GUAYUSA. Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right on. Yeah, those are awesome. Okay.
Yeah.
Great. So you're a bit of on a roll. Is there anything that you wanted to continue on with that?
In terms of oneirogens, I will say one more thing about oneirogens, which is sound is also a great oneirogen. And there's this guy named Robert Rich who in the 1980s in the Bay Area composed a bunch of electronic music pieces for dreaming. And so there's 7.5 or 8 hour pieces. You can go to Robert Rich. If you look him up, you'll see them. My favorite is one called Somnium, SOMNIUM, Somnium. And he studied also the shape of a night of sleep. You know, there's a chart that you'll see if you're doing any kind of sleep or dream research. That's all the different brainwave states that you go through during sleep. So hypnagogia as it bookends it, and hypnopompia. Those are the bookends of a night of sleep. And then you go through theta, and then delta, which is the deep. So theta I talked about, which is, you know, most of our sleep as adults is theta, and then down into delta, which is the deepest, and then back up. The first actually hour and a half of sleep is very little REM, and then you start to get a bunch of REM. We sleep in 90-minute cycles. You wake up every 90 minutes. And you're not usually aware of it because it's just sort of a surfacing. And from every time you wake, that's a sleep cycle. And so Robert Rich studied basically what a night of sleep usually looks like, and made an electronic music composition that's designed to sleep by, that keeps you in the dream states. You dream in every state except for theta. You dream in hypnagogia, you dream in hypnopompic, you dream in deep sleep. Those are weird terrors and some of the weird parasomnias, difficult dream stuff happens. And of course you dream in REM. And by the way, REM, the brain wave cycles in REM is the same as when you're in REM and you're dreaming. You can't tell from just an EEG whether someone's asleep or not, because the brain waves are just sort of doing the same thing. So sound is also really great as an oneirogen. One of the things that's fun and interesting about looking at, for example, an EEG of hypnagogia is you can, when somebody hears something, there's these spikes that happen on an EEG when somebody hears something, when they're in hypnagogia or in theta, so you can kind of notice that. You can see people on an EEG hearing in a dream.
That's fascinating. And I never even considered, I knew that you could measure the dreamwave states, but to have somebody measuring the shape of the complete cycle and composing some music to that is pretty epic.
Yeah, it's cool, right?
Yeah, that's really interesting stuff. I think that some people have been aware, I've experimented with binaural beats and things like that to, mostly it's lucid dreaming. That's definitely the popular one. So when you're using this, do you recommend people take a dream journal or anything like that, or go in, with an idea to problem solve, or what are some other uses that people can use it for?
So problem solving is great. Dream incubation, which is a very, very ancient practice, and people have been using dream work to sort of problem solve, since the ancient Greeks. And you can, there's a great dream incubation exercise in Hypnagogia. You set your intention, what is it you want to solve? Go into it, at the course of a night, go into a hypnagogic state. There's probably 3 or 4 postures you take most often when you sleep, right? I sleep on my side, and my arm wrapped around on the side, back with my arms above me or on my stomach. There's probably 3 or 4 postures you take most often when you sleep. And learning those really helps you with a kind of dream incubation. And so what you do is decide what problem you want to solve, what question you want to answer, get into hypnagogia in one dream positions and kind of hypnagogic meditate on it, and then literally sleep on it. In the morning, try to wake up as slowly as possible, get into a hypnotic state, and then go in one of your sleep positions and try in and see what comes up. And then move around your different sleep positions and see kind of what arises. So people have been using the kind of dream incubation practice for really a long time. There's also active imagination. So Jungian active imagination is also a liminal dream practice. And, when Jung and Freud split, Jung went through a period of almost a psychotic break, chaos. That's when he created the Red Book and a lot of his art. And also when he came up with the idea of active imagination. And the idea, both with active imagination and with dream incubation, is that you already have the answers, right? You already have the answers to your problem. You already know what you need to heal. It's also for physical healing. Dream incubation has been used for physical healing. And the healing cults of Asclepius in ancient Greece were working with dreams for actual physical healing. And the idea is that your body has the ability to heal, right? What do you do when you're sick? You sleep, right? And that you can get in touch with this through the unconscious, that you already have the answers, and that when you learn to directly counter the unconscious, things come up. So Jung felt like one of the ways that we achieve mental balance, also find creativity, is through learning to be in touch with the unconscious. And one of the things that's amazing about liminal dream spaces, hypnagogia, hypnopompic, is that you're awake enough that your daytime logical reasoning mind can observe what's happening.
Hello? Poor internet connection.
Okay, I just turned off my video.
There we go. Gotcha. You're in. Okay.
Okay. And so what Jung was really trying to do was to learn to actually communicate with the unconscious while you're in enough of a liminal dream space that you can take away what you've learned kind of in your waking mind. So basically you're learning to talk to yourself at these really deep levels. So active imagination is also like a liminal dream practice of, yeah, and also creativity. Like what Jung would do would be to go into hypnagogic spaces and then bring back things and create. So drawing or painting or and it's about the process. Like one of the things about getting in touch with the unconscious and with creativity is it's about the process of creating. I think a lot of people don't exercise their creativity because they think that it's about the end product. And it's not. It's about, in this instance anyway, it's about the process, right? Everybody has inherent creativity. And the idea is that getting in touch with unconscious and then expressing it creatively is actually one of the ways that you balance your psyche, one of the ways that you heal both body and mind. So learning to kind of drop down into that space. And so I talked about hypnagogia, and I haven't talked as much about hypnopompic. Hypnopompic is a lot harder because you have to have been asleep for a while to get in touch with it. So you as somebody who sleeps a lot probably do experience hypnopompic. So there's that morning when you're waking up really slowly and it's like, oh, I thought I had an idea, but you realize you've gone back into dreaming. What happens, again, we talked about this, the course of a night of sleep. Usually you wake up, if you wake up naturally without an alarm clock or without cats or kids or whoever wakes you up, usually you wake up from REM. So you're going from REM into hypnopompic. And so it's very, in hypnagogia, your conscious mind is leading, right? You're going from conscious into unconscious. With hypnopompic, you're going from unconscious into conscious and usually coming out of REM. So it's your unconscious that's leading. So it's a very different kind of experience. It's much dreamier and driftier. It's much more floaty. But if you have a really short chronotype, if you're basically if you're a lark instead of an owl, then you wake up too fast. So a lot of people don't ever experience hypnopompic. If you're the kind of person who jumps up and you're awake, so the difference between a lark and an owl chronotype is that an owl, I'm an owl, I think you are too, is you sleep a long time, you wake up slowly, it takes you a while to wake up, like morning is often a little confusing, and when you work, the longer you work, the better you get at the work, and you can work for long stretches of time. If you're a lark, oh, and you're also usually like the last person like up at the party. Larks tend to fall asleep earlier. They're the people who go to sleep sort of at the beginning. They are best when they start working. That's when they're freshest. They wake up immediately and bright-eyed. And for larks, and they often have a hard time remembering dreams, by the way. So hypnagogia is a great practice for somebody who's a lark, who wants to explore dream life, because they don't really remember REM dreams so easily. And hypnopompic is wonderful for owls. It's a great because it's really, really easy if you have an owl chronotype to surf the edge of hypnopompia. Hypnopompia is really hard to study because, again, you have to have been asleep for a long time for it to happen, and not everybody kind of comes through it. But it's also an excellent bridge to lucid dreaming. There are some practices that are about using both hypnagogia and hypnopompia to access lucid dreams. And kind of the most traditional lucid dreamers, who are Tibetan Buddhists, actually have developing your dream skills as a way of bridging consciousness into the lucid dream space.
Wow. Well, that's an incredible amount of epic information. You know, all of that is super interesting.
I know.
And what I like about it is that most of the conversations around dreaming are either on dream recall, lucid dreaming, you know, not really the understanding or the practice of, you know, taking naps during the day and using the liminal states, as you refer to. It's a much better word for liminal state than the hypnagogic and hypnopompia, or so I like those. So what I want to ask you is like a couple things. First, just to talk maybe a little bit about Yoga Nidra, because I know that you've trained with some pretty high level people and that's part of your practice. And I think a lot of people are very curious about what that is, why you do it, what are some techniques, you know, how does it help? If they want to do it, you know, what should they do? You know, breathing and breathing patterns has come up so often over the last 3 years. It's really exploded. You know, no one was talking about breathing. Now everybody is doing some sort of breathing practice. And I think it's
Yeah.
good because breath is life. And no matter which way you're doing it, you're connecting to your breath, and it's a positive practice. So touching on that. And then I was also curious about just your thoughts on consciousness and the nature of consciousness, because, you know, I think that most people believe that the only consciousness available is the one that wakes up and does the tasks and worries and stresses and, you know, does all these things and has to take care of the bills. And that's one level, but you could also do that from a peaceful mind. And I think that's a different state of consciousness, but it's definitely a different state of consciousness when you're asleep. And it's definitely a different state of consciousness, you know, when you're in between those things, and we can measure the brain waves. So it's a little bit of a deeper question, but that's one I kind of wanted to send your way and get your thoughts on.
It's a great question. Consciousness exploration is kind of the primary thing that I'm doing. A lot of things you can do with liminal dreaming. But for me, I'm really looking, so again, phenomenology, I'm really looking at what's happening in experience. I'm so much more interested in experiencing the dream state than I am in interpreting it for how is it relevant to the waking mind, right? There's a whole, I mean, experience is experience. And if you learn to have a kind of a consciousness while you're in dream state, lucid dreaming is one way, liminal dreaming is another, and my kind of my favorite. You realize that you have this whole world of things happening in your mind that you access, very different states of consciousness. So, you know, in a lucid dream, your waking consciousness breaks through in the dream world, and you can control some, but it's still this, like the concept we have right now, what we're talking to each other. Liminal dream consciousness is different, right? It's the experiences you're having are very different. The way that you think is very different. The way that you're experiencing is very different. It's a really crazy experience to have. And a lot of things arise in it. And I mean, like, what is consciousness? You know, people in consciousness studies call that the hard question, right? You know, is it just the brain? Is it, you know, some sort of force outside of the boundaries of our skin? Is it something that develops with greater complexity as, you know, as our mental states become, as we become, you know, more intricate and complex? And if so, what does that say about technology and consciousness? I mean, these are all very intense questions. And so when you learn to explore the hypnagogia and hypnopompia, you're really having a very different experience of your own consciousness. And that, I mean, it opens up more questions than answers, but it opens up a lot of questions about being. you know, and about, so I write about this in the book. My aunt died 2 years ago. We were very close. She was my godmother. And because I have learned to talk through hypnagogia, and I had a friend who talked a lot through hypnagogia, and I learned to talk to him through his hypnagogia. When my aunt, I sort of did her deathbed, when she went past the place where she had her waking consciousness, she went through a whole weeks of being in hypnagogia. And because I know how to talk to people in hypnagogia, I was able to communicate with her. And then I found out later, just kind of by coincidence, the place where she died in a hospice in Buffalo, the guy who was the director of this hospice, Dr. Christopher Kerr is his name, actually gives talks about this, about how dying people go through hypnagogia. And it often gets medicated because people call it hallucination, right? People, people's families, and my own family was like, oh no, dear, you're not with Ziggy Stardust at the movies, or what, and she was telling about her neighbors and their dogs, and she's with Ziggy Stardust, and it's not like dementia or whatever, just dying. And so his whole riff was like actually edges of death. The liminal, even kind of between life and death, you're going through this hypnagogic zone, right? And so the idea of developing your hypnagogic consciousness with even that, with even the edge between, alive and dying, is a very intense way to think about consciousness. So it brings up a lot of really intense questions about consciousness. That's a lot of what I'm exploring. That's the stuff that really primarily turns me on. The creativity stuff is great and was a surprise to me, when I had already begun these practices. But yeah, it's consciousness studies is really kind of where I'm at with this. And yeah, it's trippy.
Well, it's really fascinating what you're saying about your aunt and being in that state, because I'm not sure if this is true 100%, but I heard that when the Tibetans are doing, their meditation and they're dreaming, that part of that is the idea that if they can stay conscious through what is primarily unconscious, like our sleep and, the different brain waves, that when they pass, they're gonna be able to consciously pass over, and that's going to have a big effect on their transition and their ability to take memory beyond death and all those kinds of things.
Right, the bardo. So the Tibetan Buddhists talk about the bardo as the space between death and rebirth, right? Sort of the ultimate liminal zone. And one of the reasons that they, again, who are sort of the most traditional lucid dream practitioners, and you learn to lucid dream through liminal dreaming, one of the primary reasons that they undertake these practices is to keep your wits about you during the bardo, when you're kind of drawn toward rebirth, and there's either very scary demons or very attractive visions that are trying to draw you back into rebirth. And the longer you can keep yourself in a meditative kind of calm space and in that dream world or in that between world, the better rebirth you'll have. And so yeah, they talk a lot about dream practices as being kind of training for the bardo.
Yeah, super interesting. And then as you're saying that, do you know any other cultures or scientists or organizations working on studying this level of consciousness to the level you're kind of moving into it and exploring it? Did you catch that?
Oh, I froze. You froze again.
Can you hear me?
Yeah. Okay. So yes, there's certainly people have studied lucid dreaming in terms of working with fear and working with between zones. When it comes to the actual death rebirth, not as much. You did bring up Yoga Nidra, and one of the reasons that I love Yoga Nidra is that I experience it as a liminal dream practice. So what you're doing in Yoga Nidra is you are listening while a teacher leads you through a Nidra, right? So they lead you through different schools, have different approaches, but basically you're using body rotating consciousness through your whole body, and balancing opposites, and a bunch of different aspects, and to be brought into this really deep space, which again I would call a liminal dream space. I try to be that. There are some yoga nidra teachers who say, oh yeah, that's great, what you're talking about is great, and there are some who say, no, that's just your thing, that's not what we think is happening here, but it certainly is how I experience it. And if you've gone to a yoga nidra class or done any of it, you usually will find yourself in a really, really deep space, which is the hypnagogic space for me. And there's a lot of studies, especially through iRest, about working with Yoga Nidra for PTSD, for people who have fear experiences, for end of life, for pain management, all of these kinds of things, which is sort of using sort of the liminal dream space for those things. So they have worked with end of life people with Yoga Nidra. You go into these spaces and learning, basically it's kind of the deepest relaxation you can get, because your body is as relaxed. It's asleep. Your body's asleep. It's as relaxed as it gets, and then you still have some sort of, mental ability. In terms of lucid dreaming, I know Stephen LaBerge and his institute, and then some other people have also worked with lucid dreaming, again, for PTSD, end of life issues, that kind of thing, because you can learn to work with fear, because you're characterized both PTSD and sort of obvious reasons. So kind of control the dream, you learn to control the fear, and then that's something that you can carry into your waking life. So it does have that kind of overlap.
Amazing. Yeah, I totally agree. It's an interesting concept too, to bring up the idea of controlling fear in the dream, and then bringing over that awareness or knowledge into life, because it's ideally the same thing. And I heard, and I think that it's true, that there's no difference to your brain or consciousness when you're dreaming and you're in a dream or in real life. And the same thing through visualization. When they're, Olympic sprinters, they tie up, do all the neurons in their head or whatever the heck they do, the brain mapping. And when they're visualizing the sprint, actually the same parts of the brain are going. So in a deep sleep, you're kind of like in this dream. And I've had Tom Campbell on the podcast a couple of times, who's a leading physicist on simulation theory, and talking about simulation. Some of the work in physics is talking about the hologram, that's formed from the black hole, which is very interesting stuff. And I'm just looking at these concepts from like pure, have no idea what's going on, but I was like, oh, that's an interesting idea. And then also had a Native American on who said the same thing. It's like, in our world, we believe you're in some sort of like hologram reality. And so dreaming and reality, like it feels so real when you're in the dream, and when you're in life, it feels so real. But I think that a lot of people aren't having a very fun dream. They're not having a very fun experience. It's a very challenging one, but I'm not sure what the limits of this reality are, the limits of consciousness, and how much we can influence our reality versus what's happening to us. But we can definitely influence our state of mind through experiences. So that's just my rant. Do you have anything to add to that? I just wanted to say that.
Yeah, that's a great one. I love that one. And there's something that I tend to call the spectrum of the real. Right. So, obviously, if a safe falls on your head, it's going to kill you, no matter how positive you think about the world. But on the other end of the spectrum, like when you're like in love and, getting some good action, whatever, you look, but everyone agrees. Oh, you have that glow, right? Everyone agrees, right? So you can look at the spectrum of the real, where at one end, obviously, the way that you're mindset is determining what happens to you in the world, right? So there's the spectrum of reality, and to what degree is what's happening in your mind. So like vision, right? like a huge amount of vision is actually imagination, right? So imagination as perception. This is a thing I like to talk about. And everyone says seeing is believing, but in fact, vision is super complicated. We're taking in so much that our mind has to filter and interpret, right? So you have to be filling in with your own expectations and imagination what you're seeing. So in fact, seeing is also largely determined by imagination, right? So if I walk down the street and you walk down the street, we will remember different things. So, I mean, in a sense, we're moving through different worlds, right? So there definitely is, I mean, again, if a safe falls on your head, it's going to kill you, right? I know this, there's a very strong idea in some parts of the culture, like to create your own reality, right? And there's a certain degree to which that's just, if you're from a war-torn country, you did not create that reality, right? But there's this whole space on the spectrum of the real where whatever you're doing to affect your own consciousness is really affecting your own experience, even to the degree of what you see and what you perceive and what you take in. And when you start to explore your own consciousness through dream work, for example, or all the myriad other ways that people do it, you start to understand these things a little better and think, oh, okay, I'm co-creating some part of this. How does that work exactly? It can get pretty weird.
Yeah, I imagine, especially if you're exploring those other states of consciousness. And I think that's what the value of, and I like what you said earlier in the podcast where you said, like, it's more about the process and it opens up more questions and answers. And, when I've had really, crazy dreams, or when I had like an ayahuasca experience or different things where I thought I was going to get an answer, I just got more questions, way more questions. And so I think that, and for my life path and what I've pursued, it's more about like getting into like the reality that I'm in now and what I can do as far as like entheogens, like what do I create within my body? How do I explore my own consciousness and inviting the process more than seeking the answer. And I don't know where I heard it from, but it's just like living more fully in the mystery. And that's part of the awakening process of, when people say, oh, you're awakened, or I don't know how you would define it, but there's certain people out there that would know that they have no flying F what is going on here. It's just the mystery is so profound, and they know for sure that they're not going to know the biggest, deepest questions. They'll know something. They'll know a bit of a bit of a bit of a bit, like a little fractal, but a lot of people are going around like they know something and they keep seeking like they're going to find out. But if once you find out something, then all of a sudden it fractals into like the craziest thing. So it just explodes. You're like, oh my God. And so part of that challenge is to be okay in the mystery. And I really like what you said about the process. Is like, it's not about the end result. It's just about the creating, and not creating this piece of art. So the end result is you get $49.95 for your piece of art, and then you make it into a business, and then you've become enlightened. Although all of that would be swell, it doesn't seem to be working that way. And if we can immerse into the process, I think that's where the value is for our growth.
Hear, hear. That's beautifully said.
Cool. Thanks. well, this has been a very fantastic podcast. I'm really excited to read your book. You have a very interesting background and very knowledgeable, from your researcher background, and a different take in dreaming that people aren't really discussing. And I think it makes it accessible for people. And I think there's massive value in exploring other states of consciousness. A lot of people have told me, I can't dream, I can't do this. And this is an easy way for them to begin to explore it. So, but I want to ask you, and hopefully the siren that's going by isn't too loud. I got the good mic trying to muffle it in. Nice. Is there anything that you wanted to share, talk about, or you wish that I'd asked? You can feel free to elaborate as long as you wish. But anything you'd wish that I'd ask, or just closing thoughts and making sure you could let people know where they can find you.
Okay. In terms of closing thoughts, I mean, really, I love that you are kind of closing on this point of consciousness, because we're astounding, we humans, in our capacity for consciousness and for questioning our own and exploring our own experience and our own minds is, I think, like the most remarkable thing about us. And the exploration itself really is the point, right? I mean, there's exploring what's happening in your own mind. And by the way, there's an image that I wanted to give you. So if you think about consciousness as like the land, right? And you think about unconscious as like water, those are images that often get used. The place where people surf is where water hits land, because that's where it's chaotic, right? And that's where it's chaotic makes waves. It's a great image for like this hypnagogia and hypopnea, where there's like 9 different, brain waves. It's chaotic. So it's like basically you're surfing the edge of consciousness, right? Like finding the place sort of between awake and asleep, and like being able to stay on it for a long time and seeing what arises. And it's going to be different for everybody, because it really is a tour of what's in your own consciousness. That's what you're going to experience in a liminal dream state. So, I mean, really to explore your own mind and go into these places is really that's what I kind of hope people most do. And I love when people tell me that they've come up with their own practices or their own exercises using liminal dream work to try to explore what their own minds are, because that's really, I mean, you should take it and make it your own. Everyone should always take it and make it their own, right? I mean, there's great teachers and masters out there, but you're the one who knows your own mind, and you should always kind of be your own master. In terms of how to find me, my book, Liminal Dreaming, comes out at the end of May, but you can order it now anywhere you order a book, your local bookstore or Amazon or ABE, or you can order it off the Penguin website. So anywhere, Liminal Dreaming. UrbanDreamscape.com is my main website. I've got a few different ones. I have one for the Oneironauticum. I have one for liminal dreaming. I have one for some of my psychogeographical or oneric practices, but they all jump off of UrbanDreamscape.com. And I actually tweet a dream a day, and I've been doing that for a decade on Twitter as Oneirifer, Oneiro dream fur, which is what most people call me, F-E-R, fur, Oneirifer. And so it's a lovely little dream journal, and I've got good 10 years of dreams going back, and they're that's actually pretty fun to read. And on Facebook, Liminal Dreaming is my page.
Amazing. Awesome. A decade of tweets. That's like, you're like the OG of Twitter. That's
yeah. That's
just as a side note.
Pretty much every day too.
Yeah. Wow. Well, that's, all of this is really fascinating stuff, and it's a take on it that's not very common. So I think there's a lot of value, and you have a lot of research in it. And I think, people will take it up and just explore just a few of those ideas. Like, like you said, I didn't know Salvador Dali did it. I knew Einstein did it. I heard Edison did it. I know friends that use it as a daily practice or a creative practice, and just the idea of immersing in the process. So much really great stuff here. And I invite everybody to check out your book, check out your work coming out soon, published by Penguin. That's a big deal. Good for you.
Thank you.
No, I don't think that's a place for slouches. So that's amazing. So yeah, thanks so much for coming on and sharing your work and everything you're doing.
Thank you. This has been fun. It's been a great conversation. I've really enjoyed it.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, guys, for watching. We'll see you in the next one.
Thank you.
Bye.